We aim to be an educational support network, providing women that are involved in dairy in any shape or form support, essentially, in connections. Yep, so today we're looking at excelling in breeding. So yeah, the topic for the spring is excelling in breeding. So Margaret, if I can get you to roll on the slides here as we go. Thank you very much. That's fab. And we've got two great speakers. We've got Dr. Margaret Kelleher. She's a senior geneticist with ICBF for the last eight years, so responsible for running and managing the national genetic evaluations. But she was also involved in developing the decision support tool, Cow's Own Worth, if you've ever heard of it, which aids culling decisions. So she's heavily involved there. So Margaret's going to talk to us today about EBI and the Herd Plus assessment of breeding performance. And we also have today Martin Kavangh. He's a qualified veterinary surgeon. He qualified in 1993 and did 14 years of mixed veterinary practice, but has subsequently specialised in herd health problem solving, looking at farm system performance, system planning and training. So he now has nearly 30 years of that. He's hugely practical, very good at figuring out why systems might not be working. His current role is with Munster Bovine as a business development and sustainability manager at this time. And Martin today is going to be covering breeding performance and assessing and managing problems. We're going to basically have our two guest speakers talking to you both for around 30 minutes, and then there'll be an opportunity at the end for any questions you might have to put them on the chat function, or even if you want to get interactive, we might try raising a hand, but put any questions you have as we go through the presentations in the chat, and I'll try and get to them at the end for the last 30 minutes. So I think we also, just to remind you that this online series of talk is also supported by a series of on-farm meetings. So we'd like to thank our host for agreeing to have the on-farm meetings there. So and we'll also be supported by ICBF and Munster on the day. So I think we may as well roll on. Margaret, thank you again. And if you'd like to kick off, please
Perfect.
feel free.
Thanks, Mary. And look, thanks very much from the onset for asking me to do this presentation. So, excuse me, sorry. So for anyone that doesn't know who ICBF are, I have just a few introductory slides and basically what we do. So the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, just for a bit of context, you know, it's been around since 2000. Prior to that, you had a number of different organizations. So all these had to come together to agree to having a centralized database. So that's been a huge benefit to the farmers on the ground in terms of, you know, reducing the duplication of records. But really the main objective of ICBF is the genetic improvement of the cattle herd out there. So to do that, we need records. So we need all your milk recording. We need, when you tag every calf, you have information coming in there that we know the calving dates, we're able to link pedigrees and all that. So you need a massive database there to run genetic evaluations, and that's our central role. So basically anyone that's been using our services will be very familiar with the EBI and the Eurostars out there. So they've been, you know, moved on over the years as well in terms of development. So we're always kind of improving our genetics with the background of scientific literature and research that goes on in the background. So we have a lot of links in the industry with Chagas and other members in terms of improving our genetics day to day. So in terms of the database, look, it's the case of getting information in, but it's also a case of getting the information out. So, you know, at the very, very top, and, you know, it's really important to state that all the data in the database is farmer owned. So what data goes in there, you know, our mantra is that it's farmer owned. So it's a bit different from, I suppose, any, you know, technologies that are out there in other spaces. out there in terms of owning data. So farmers have their data coming in, but they can also get their data out. And then there's loads of different sources there in terms of your milk carton data, the milk processors, the AI orgs, all the research, herd books, vets, abattoirs, marts. It's all massive amount of information. But one space, I suppose, that has expanded the most in recent times is our genomic data coming in and out of the database. So we're close to 3 million animals that have been genotyped now in 2023. So to put that into context, for every one of those animals, there's on average about 50,000 pieces of DNA information stored in the database. So back in just 2015, we had about 1.8 billion pieces of information related to genotypes in our database, and that's actually grown 10 times now. So we're up at around 160 billion pieces of information on those genotyped animals. So in terms of the database, it's growing at an exponential rate, and with more data is more reliable figures. So we'll get into the figures there shortly. And again, just to give you a kind of a flavor of the yearly data figures that you might see coming in and out of this database, in terms of the animal births, over 2.4 million animal births coming in and out. You have the milk recording information, which is crucially important for the evaluations, slaughter records, farm movements, live animals. So again, they're all very, very big numbers. But again, just to emphasize again that genotype data, it's probably the one that has the most exponential growth in recent years. So also part of ICBF then is the Herd Plus team. So some of you will have engaged with them and others might not be members. So we just have a few slides here on what Herd Plus provides. So while we have this database and run the genetic evaluations in ICBF, we have this dedicated team in Herd Plus then that, provide a lot of information in terms of the reports, but we have profile screens again on all your information, for example, milk recording, your fertility profiles and so forth. And I have a few examples in the presentation of that. You can also record loads of different information through Herd Plus. And I suppose one of the key things is you have a dedicated customer support team there. So on the slide here, I actually have the Herd Plus number there to the right. Just there's a example of just one of the services that Herd Plus provide is the Third Advice. So I have a slide on that later, and you can see some of the team there promoting it there. So again, for any of our members, they have access to Herd Plus through the website, through www.icbf.com, through apps, and also then the direct line. So they're serving over 9,000 dairy herds and 15,000 beef herds. And of course, there is the cost associated, but hopefully there's enough bang for the buck there in terms of what they provide. So moving on then from just talk about the organization itself, it's the key thing here. Sorry, I just need to miss some people there. The key thing that you're probably all focused on now coming up to the breeding season is how to breed the best animals going forward. So the EBI has been around since 2001 and it has evolved every year since then. So what we currently have here to the right is this diagram there of the EBI. So what's in the EBI are traits that are important in terms of your bottom line profit. So your production traits, milk, fat, protein, obviously would be key ones there, but also fertility in terms of calving, interval, survival. And then we have other sub-indices in there that also have an impact on the profitability. But some of you might be aware that at the end of last year in 2022, we had a lot of updates to the EBI in terms of just improving it. So cell count was one example. We improved our cell count evaluations. So now we're using your data in a more accurate way. We're actually using more data points from your milk recordings. So again, what we saw when we implemented this new cell count evaluation was that we were actually better able to spread out the good cows from the poor cows, for example, and same for the bulls in terms of when you're selecting your bulls for breeding. So definitely we have seen health becoming quite important for people in their breeding season. So it's maybe one that you'll be talking about in your own discussion groups. But another big change, I suppose, and quite a unique one was the introduction of the carbon subindex. And again, I suppose that actually moves away more from being an economic type of subindex, and it's more to do with sustainability and environmental pressures on us. So, as you're well aware, the ag industry has a target there of reducing their greenhouse gases by 25%, and breeding has been identified as part of the solution there. So this is the reason why we're trying to just accelerate the reduction in our carbon or in our methane gas emissions. So in terms of that is where we are with the EBI and how has it progressed over time. So when it was introduced in 2001, you can see there in the graph on the left, there's a blue line there showing our EBI and how it has steadily increased since its introduction. And that was in tandem with milk and fertility increasing. So, we're talking now about carbon and why is carbon in the EBI? And there's, maybe it's just, it's probably a hard one to accept, but back prior to, we'll say, just the start of EBI, milk and fertility was also quite a conundrum for people. Everyone was just breeding for milk. It was just milk, fat, protein in the RBI. So to tell a farmer that they need to, consider, reducing their milk to increase their fertility was quite a hard one to sell. But we've now come to a point, and you can see it there in the graph, where you can actually increase your milk and your fertility at the same time, but you just need to breed. You need a breeding program there that can find those correlation breakers out there. So bulls that can actually, progress the herd in the right direction. So currently in 2021, we have an average EBI there in our first calved heifers of 151. And that represents a 10-year genetic gain per year. So it's great advances in the national herd. And in terms of carbon, the carbon intensity of those figures then showing that we're actually reducing our carbon by 10%. But again, as I mentioned there earlier, that we actually need to go faster in terms of meeting those targets of reducing our greenhouse gas output. So again, I suppose Mary had indicated that you'd be interested in looking at some of the key performance indicators. And again, just to show how EBI has helped with some of the KPIs that you'd be interested in. There's a really good table here from Kevin Downing and Her Plus, showing the milliliters, milk solids, butter, fat, protein, and so on. Now, there's a lot of figures on this table, so again, maybe we just focus on the two columns on the right. So if we were to looking at the national herd, the top 20% versus the average, in terms of EBI, there's a difference there of 196 to 153 in the average. And you can just, if you go down through those two columns, you can see that, how the top 20% on EBI are in all measures of those KPIs outperforming the average herd. So I suppose just to highlight some of the fertility ones there, like the calving interval at 367 is really, really close to the targets that the industry have set in terms of you should try to aim for 365. Probably an interesting one there, right, and maybe one for discussion is the 6-week calving rate. Look, industry has indicated that should be at 90%, but we're just not seeing that in the top 20%. So it's at 79, which is still an excellent figure. And, is it a case that we're not achieving it through breeding in our fertility, or is it a management decision? Is it just too intense to have 90% calving in 6 weeks? So look, it's just an interesting one there to have. The last row there just represents again the greenhouse gas emission metric again. So with higher EBI, you're having less carbon equivalent output. So that's a good thing. That's the way you want to be breeding for. So again, just a few examples here of, well, what figures should I be looking at in my breeding season? So, we'd always be saying try to aim for a high EBI, but also have, you have to be careful of your actual makeup of your EBI. So for one herd, they might have the same EBI, 164, but have very, very different sub-index makeup. So here we have an example here of two herds having the exact same EBI. However, their milk and fertility sub-index are completely different. So they should be picking completely different bulls during their breeding season. So we'll say for the herd there on the bottom, they should be really focusing on trying to increase that milk sub-index. It's at 10, whereas a lot of their EBI is coming from their fertility. Again, another example of where a herd might be very similar in their EBI, so the exact same and have the exact same milk, but it's coming from very, very different traits within the production subindex. So if we were to look at this herd here on the top, they have a milk kg there of 142 kgs. So that's the PTA, so that's the genetic merit that they're going to pass on to their offspring. And then they have fat and protein there, 7.2 and 8.1, versus the herd there in the bottom, where their metrics are -117, 8.9, and 3.5. So I don't know. I don't think we can really open it up to the floor there to see, well, can anyone spot there which herd there is the more profitable herd in terms of their metrics? And I won't put Mary maybe might spot it straight away, but it's actually, I worked it out there before the talk, and it is actually the top herd is actually more profitable in their metrics. But it's not just because they have a plus milk kg. You have to really dig into those figures there. You can see that the protein in the herd is quite good. Sorry. So for just one last example of, again, where you might have a herd that have very, very the same milk kgs, but again, their milk subindex could be quite different. And again, that's just the makeup of the fat and protein coming through there. So the herd they're having a 20 and a 50 milk subindex, yet their fat and proteins are quite different. So again, look, there's a lot of figures there, and it can be quite challenging, and we can't be always trying to remember all these individual figures. So a really, really good place to go to is your Herd Plus EBI scorecard, because it shows you a benchmark exactly where your herd is at. So without having to know, well, what does 206 EBI mean? All you have to do is look at this card and see the national average is 160, and this herd in particular is even ahead of the national top 10%, and the star rating there showing that it's a 5-star. So, and you can see exactly where in that 5-star it's ranking. So it's in the top 5%. So I just think this is a really, really handy tool for your breeding season going forward, that, if I was to look at this herd, I would identify straight away that, look, maybe they should be selecting bulls there that might improve their fertility a bit better. And certainly their health subindex there could do with a lot of a lot of attention. They're at 27%, and are they seeing that on the ground? Are they having issues on the ground? But again, just with the previous slides there, just to be very careful that while those figures give an overall indication of the subindex, just the individual traits could be quite different between individual animals. So just, I'm going to run through the next few slides quite quickly, but just for the group here ahead of your breeding season, a few of the main reports that you might want to look at just before you dig into your herds would be your co-op performance report. And again, look, very useful in terms of making breeding decisions. You also have, I'm sure you've been asked for before, from other farmers for this, if you're selling animals, and even financial institutions are looking for these now. So it has a lot of information there, and it is a good barometer of how the herd is performing. So again, just have a look at that and see, is there any of those traits there that you think that you should really improve. The Kavangh report also, again, look, giving you a benchmark between the bottom 10% and top 10% in terms of all these KPIs. Again, looking at this herd, obviously there's very good figures on this herd, but it might just show you some aspects that you might have put much attention into previously. So again, is your current replacement rate, suiting your herd? Has stocking rates changed now with new regulations? Do you need to reconsider that? And what's the impact then in terms of what heifers will be coming in on the ground the year after? And obviously then your milk recording, I mean, look, not everyone is milk recording, but we have seen a massive increase in the uptake in milk recording. So it's up 38% since 2020. And that's great news in terms of, management and making better breeding decisions. But also in terms of, for us in genetic evaluations, it just means that we have more data coming in. So we get better reliabilities on our genetic proofs for the individual traits in the production subindex. And then finally, the dairy 5-year trend report. You might have seen some of these in discussion groups. Again, look, it just really gives a great view of how your breeding decisions are impacting your performance on the ground. And like sometimes you might see little blips in individual categories. So if we were to take there one example there on the right, for this herd there, heifer's calf, 22, 26 months. Quite a blip there in 2020, and like usually we always find there's always a very logical reasons for those things. So look, it's just they can be quite helpful, and they're all just a click of a button and they're ready to go. So look, that database is serving everyone quite well in terms of using it. So it's just to get people aware that these reports and all this knowledge is put together and ready for you to use. I'll very briefly go through this, but sure, I couldn't do a talk without mentioning the cow's own wort. This is what I did during my PhD and implemented here in ICBF. So it actually got implemented to industry in 2017. So again, as Mary mentioned, look, it's a case of, it ranks cows best to worst, and you then can decide what cows to cull. So while the majority of people would use this towards the end of their breeding or end of their lactation season, towards the end of the year, what cows do I want to get rid of out of the herd? This really does a great job at picking out the obvious cows, the ones that are, lay calving, a high cell count, but also cows that you mightn't actually realize are kind of more passenger type cows. So, for example, a cow that has just had poor milk performance for the last 2 or 3 years, and the background information of her and the predictions built into this cow's own wort telling you that she's not going to get any better. So, she would be a more appropriate cull than a cow that, that you might think for other reasons should be culled. So again, look, I won't go into much detail. There is a lot on it, but if anyone wants to ask me about it, I don't be more than happy to talk about it. And actually, I think I'll be at the open day, Teagasc Open Day, the 4th of July, actually talk about it as well, if anyone wants to look into that as well. So look, just some tools to help you achieve those breeding objectives. So I mean, look, as I mentioned, the database is just the amount of data coming in terms of genotyped animals is phenomenal, and the benefits of it in terms of accelerating your genetic gain have been shown time and time again. So what's happening is you're able to pick out your best animals based on a more reliable proof in terms of genomics. So if you just take an example here of a farmer who had 48 heifers, so when they weren't genotyped, so they just had a parent average EBI. He just plotted them there in terms of EBI, the 48 of them, and you can see to the right were the more higher EBI heifers, and he wants to sell 22 of them. When you genotype them, this is what does happen, because when you have a parent average, your reliability of that figure is only around 35%. But when you genotype, you increase your reliability of your EBI by about another 25%, so you're up around high 50s. So the reason for that is we have more information. So you have the DNA of the animal coming in on top of all its background pedigree and its relatives' performance. So we've more information to tell us that actually some EBIs of these animals have changed. So some have got better and some have got worse. So there's big variation in the group. So actually there was 10 animals towards the left of this graph that this farmer would have sold if he had just used his parent average EBI, but now that he has his genomics, 10 of these animals are staying in the herd. So again, that's what we mean by, by genotyping, you're improving your genetic gain, because we're better able to give you indications of the animals that have the better genes for you in the herd. The cost is around €22 an animal, but Teagasc actually have done some research, I think it was George Ramsbottom, where this cost of €22 was actually a return on investment of 4:1, so it's really, really good value. So AI versus stock bulls, again, look, I think, it depends on the group, obviously, but what we've seen from the national average here, that look, stock bull progeny are consistently €80 behind the AI. And also we would also kind of, and I don't have much time to talk about it here, but we also have a lot of debate around the genomic bulls versus daughter-proven bulls. So look, if you are trying to accelerate your genetic gain, the advice is to, use a team of high EBI bulls. So for that to happen, they would be your genomic bulls. So really, I think that the stock bulls it would not be a recommendation anyway, and definitely to, get people to consider using their genomic bulls. So part of the genomics, then we have this Gene Ireland program. So, the Gene Ireland program is where bulls first get tested. So they're the youngest bulls out there. You have AI companies in partnership in this program, and they are trying to, find the best bulls going forward for, selling commercially. So before they go on to, the commercial catalogues, they get tested through the program, and their EBI is obviously going to be that bit higher because they are the youngest bulls out there. And whatever generation of genetic gain you make, you're going to have improved EBI go forward. So look, it's a case of people signing up to the program and they get a pack of straws. And the idea of it is there's going to be some bulls that will, make it into the AI companies going forward, and some don't. But the number of straws that any one farmer takes, they are only small numbers. So it's a case of trying to attract people to use high EBI bulls. With, while there is a risk, there's the ones that do make it then mean that you have daughters from these bulls with the highest genetic merit available that given year. So then the sex semen issue as well, in terms of some people might be considering using it. We are seeing a massive increase in the number of people signing up to take sex semen straws, and obviously that's great in terms of people trying to increase the chances of having dairy heifers. So look, if the advice out there really is, if you're going to use sex semen, use at least 2 sex semen straws to generate each dairy female required. The conception rates we have seen in the past have been just slightly lower than that of conventional. But look, there's been a lot of advances in this technology, and it seems to be improving year on year. So it's great to see such an uptake on it. So again, maybe there's a level of confidence out there in the industry of people using it. The DBI then, I suppose, just to touch on that, the Dairy Beef Index. People may or may not be that well aware of it, but so this is for using selecting bulls to produce your beef progeny from your cows. So any of the cows that you don't want breeding replacements from, you might consider using a beef bull. Look, plenty of people have stock bulls as well, but look, it's very important that we try to improve our beef traits coming out of the dairy herd as well. So the DBI takes into account calving traits such as the gestation of the bull and the calving ease, but also there's a beef component of it as well. And then finally here, then we have and I mentioned at the start there, the ICBF Her Plus Sire Advice tool. Again, it's an application there where it does all the hard work for you in terms of when you're selecting your females to breed, that if you have bulls in mind, that it would actually maximize the genetic gain from your herd in the most reliable way possible in terms of reducing the inbreeding. So it won't allow any inbreeding, and also it tries to balance the herd. So it won't mate bulls that are extreme for milk on extreme milk cows. It would put them onto lower milk cows. So look, there's a lot of guidelines and advice and loads of information on our website on that, but just to keep in mind when you are using picking your bulls, please just be aware of the number of bulls we would recommend to be using relative to the herd size that you have. And just so, yeah, the last bullet point there, in terms of the sire advice, there was actually a new addition in terms of the sex semen, so it ties in nicely. So there was a brand new screen added to that, the sire advice for sex semen users. So you will be asked when you log into your sire advice if you're using sex semen or not. If you're not, you just click no, and it'll go onto the screen that you might have been using previous years. But if you are using it, it actually has come up with, the lads have come up with a really, really great application where it shows what cows are most appropriate. You can indicate, if you want to select your cows at a certain number of days calved, a certain parity number and all that, all the key recommendations we're hearing from the industry of what cows should be used in terms of sex semen, all those filters are there. So it's a really, really great addition to the sire advice this year. So that was only launched there last week. And just very quickly there, in terms of the sire advice, we have the beef on dairy component as well. So look, if some people might be running sire advice just on their dairy bulls, but you also have an option there to select it for the beef, and you can run your sire advice as many times as you want. So not to be afraid to be using it like that. But look, it's just again to show what's in Her Plus in terms of all the tools. I think this is really nice to show how they flow into each other. So you have the DBI, the active bull lists are all there on our website in terms of picking your bulls. You can also talk to your AI companies and look at their catalogs. But they'll, all of them will show the proofs that are there in terms of trying to improve your beef merit. You use your sire advice, so you're able to select your cows that are for beef matings particularly, so you don't want dairy replacements off them. And then at the very end, then you will have this new commercial beef value on your calves on a profile screen. So again, just if you're selling calves next year, and you want to know what is the commercial beef value of the calf, it shows you the beef merit of that calf going forward. So look, I mean, this is just a graphic of the DBI, similar to what I showed earlier with the EBI, just again, if anyone's interested in the actual individual traits. But the main sub-indices within the DBI being the beef sub-index taking up the majority of the emphasis, 62%. You have your calving there, 31%, and the addition of the carbon sub-index was in there as well. So again, it's all about trying to get more profit on the ground while being sustainable going into the future. And again, just to drive home the point of like, oh, why do we really need all this? I mean, you look at these two calves, there's huge variation out there. So we have an example here of one of the traits within the DBI, and this is the progeny out of spec. So while the calves might look very similar in terms of their sires, so they have different sires, and you can see out of one of those calves there, only 10% of his progeny were out of spec, whereas for the little bull calf there on the right, he had a sire there with 70% of his progeny out of spec. So like for one breeding decision that you make, I mean the impact it has on your profitability going forward, or to the people that are buying and rearing those calves going forward, is huge. So as an industry, we really need to drive home that message about the integration of the dairy and the beef, in terms of trying to make sure that everyone is getting enough profit from their systems and also doing it in a sustainable way. And yeah, that leads up to the commercial beef value again. So this is a new ranking of animals in terms of just looking at the terminal traits, as we'd call them, so just the beef traits. So these animals are not going to be for breeding, but this is what we're going to see on some mark boards. So if you have genotyped your calves and they're they're for beef, so you'd have that there on your dairy beef crosses, or maybe it's your Frisian male calves. They'll all have CBVs. So if you're a herd plus member, you'll see that on your profile screens, or else if they're genotyped, they'll be on the mark boards. That they should be on all mark boards throughout, hopefully later this year, but a lot of mark boards have taken them on, and you should see that CBV there. So again, look, it's just driving home that message as well. Maybe it's if anyone's interested in buying these type of calves as well, it's just to, have a look at the CBV. So again, a calf here with a CBV of 87 and this calf here of -20, just again, while they're calves and only a few weeks old, it's very hard to tell the difference between animals, but they will express their traits as they get older. And, again, if we're just to drive home that message of trying to improve or beef off the dairy herd, it would really it just benefits everyone in the industry. So my take-home message, Mary, is this breeding plan that HerPlus have devised here. So again, just to use all the tools that are available to you. And look, if they need, there's advisors that are well aware of all these tools, so go for help, or maybe you have your own discussion groups in the DWI group. But firstly, the first point to call would be, before looking at catalogues, and Martin might start pushing some catalogues there from Munster in a minute, but there is to identify your own genetics in your herd first. And again, the first protocol there would be that scorecard. It just tells you so much in such a a small space. You can clearly see the information there, but you also to use the sire advice. So before looking into the bulls, then you need to really, define your breeding goals. What are the main things I need to pick up on? Is it my fertility? Is it my protein? What are the traits I need to improve on? And selecting your team of bulls. Again, remember those guidelines in terms of the number of bulls, just to make sure that you don't have any. If a bull was to drop in his EBI next spring or something, that you're not going to have a crop of calves from him that are much lower EBI than you expected. And breeding your best EBI females. So again, once you know the number of replacements that you need for your herd, that will indicate, well, how many cows you're going to breed. So look, again, some advice from Herd Plus would be that you should probably try to breed your replacements from anything over the 150 mark on EBI, and that's just coming from national average figures. Look, every herd is individual and they might have their own reasons. Maybe you might be interested in just buying in your stock, but look, that they're just some of the guidelines. using a stock bull, I don't even think that should be there really, but look, that's everyone's preference. You know, there's loads of selection out there in terms of the active bull list, so just to use that. And then anything then that you're not getting replacements from, use your DBI and have a look at your CBV of your calves. And look, just to summarize there, just that the EBI is delivering more profit per cow while reducing your carbon footprint, and just know your own strengths and weaknesses going forward, and using that team of bulls is crucial. So I might hand it back over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Margaret. That was great. I do have a few questions myself, but what we'll do is we'll roll on to Martin at this stage. I'm just conscious of time, and then we'll go to questions at the end. So again, introducing Martin Kavangh, as I say, hugely practical vet who's definitely very good at problem solving. So Martin, take it away.
Okay, hopefully the technology is working, Mary. Can you see the presentation there?
Yep, I can see the presentation and I can also see you, Martin, so that's great.
Great, fine. Thanks, Mary, anyway, thanks for the invitation. It's really appreciated. And even though Margaret has said it, I'm not going to go through lists of catalogues and favourite bulls and all that. That's not really my job. When we're at the day meetings, we certainly can give you access and have a look at some of those. But I think the brief, Mary, you set out for me was maybe look at some practical aspects of breeding management. So I'm going to dip back into probably a bit of my previous career in terms of looking at the veterinary side of this. What's practical to do on farm? When should we intervene? When not? And maybe throw open the debate a little. When are we intervening? Maybe too much, and sometimes we need to leave these herds flow and work if they're doing everything right. So that's the approach I'm going to take. I'm going to zip through it pretty quickly. I think a lot of you on are pretty expert at this area, and hopefully that in some of the questions will come up with some more gems rather than me just lecturing at you about stuff like this. Okay, let's hopefully see now if all this works. Great, super. Look, there's lots of metrics put out. We're a spring calving grazing system. There might be some of you there who are doing some all year round or block calving. But if we take it that the vast majority were seasonal like grass, and these figures are trotted out in terms of what your targets would be. And it's interesting that while we have that national 90% 6-week calving rate target, our top 20% are not getting there, as Margaret has pointed out. And maybe should we be getting there? I'm not too sure, but certainly if we're falling below that 80% in terms of 6-week calving rate, it can be hard to drag herds back into good calving blocks, and we run into fertility problems that build over time if we allow this first 6 weeks to slip as such. So while I'm not going to bang on that you have to do 90%, I certainly am expecting herds of high standard to be doing 80% in 6 weeks. We talk about having 60% of the herd mature cows. Brilliant. If you're expanding and growing your herd, it's not going to be the case. And also, again, a caveat, and I would have said this maybe at some discussion groups, let's be careful. Some of those very big herds and long walks, necessarily having mature cows that survive very well and do very well, absolutely keep them and breed them into the system. But sometimes we need to keep a bit of youth and vigor and keeping those herds moving. So again, your system will often dictate where these figures need to land. I would suggest if you want that good genetic gain, I certainly would be trying to replace out over 18%, 20%, 22%, or if my herd is in that poor EBI category or there's certain traits I want to push on, I might replace a lot more aggressively to get that genetic benefit in. So don't lock yourself necessarily just into a figure. Look at what your herd needs to do. I do want to calve them early. I want a long lactation. It's driven by the calving rate and when you decide to shut off the machine. We want to get a lot of mature cows calved early, and I think this is one issue I've come across quite a bit. I see false 6-week calving rates being driven by high volumes of heifers shoved in at the start, and we look at the calving rate of the mature cows, and we could be 60% or below, and that can indicate that there's a problem going on, that those higher yielding or more mature cows may be struggling in that system a little bit. Replacement heifer management, it's often not looked at enough, and I had an interesting call just this evening from a chap talking about synchronization heifers. And, you know, he was talking about 20% of his heifers not cycling yet. So, and we have those issues that arise in farm based on calf rearing, based on that first winter management of heifers. So attention to detail there is important. Okay, you all know the value of this. Again, I'm sort of contradicting myself in a way, looking at this 5.5 lactations per cow. You know, I'm not sure in some herds, but definitely we know when you pump in a lot of heifers, we're going to have less milk out of that group. And it's going to take about 1.6 lactations for those heifers to come back into profit if we guesstimate a heifer is going to be costing us 1,500 quid to put her on the ground. So we do need those animals to start paying us back, and we need to bring them through enough lactations to warrant that. All right, so herd maturity and that bringing through lactations is going to be very dependent on the fertility. A little bit of maths. This applies all over the world where I've dealt with fertility in different herds. And I can oversimplify fertility to a certain extent. Your submission rate, number of cows you present for service as such, by the conception rate, number of those cows that are actually going to conceive, determines the pregnancy rate in that time. So if I present a bunch of cows in 3 weeks, conception rate is a certain figure, I get a pregnancy rate in that period. So whatever happens in that 6-week period, to get a 6-week pregnancy rate, I need to drive a 6-week submission rate, and I need to have adequate conception rate. So I get that multiplier and I get enough pregnancies. So people with poor submission, even if they have super conception rates, can end up with low preg rates. So there's always a balance in here. And one thing we're very much in control of is the submission rate. How many cows do we actually present for service? You cannot get a cow and calf unless you put semen in her. So from that point of view, are we serving enough cows? So if I push the SR, my pregnancy will increase. And I really want in seasonal 6-week calving or 6-week calving rates, I want my submission rate to be over 90%. And it's the first thing I will look at when I'm looking at a fertility problem in a herd. I look at, is this a submission rate problem? Is it a conception rate problem? Or am I losing pregnancies? Okay, so conception rates, once I get over 55% in dairy herds, I'm jumping around, I'm happy enough. People will quote 60, 65, and they will achieve those in certain systems, and that's great if you do, but I certainly won't start complaining unless you go below the 55. And again, that preg rate after 4 cycles. So at best, if my cow is calved long enough, I'm going to have 4 chances to get her in calf, and I want my pregnancy rate to be over 90%. Okay, remember that later calving cow, I don't have as many cycles, so I'm losing my opportunity. My gambling odds are going down. Okay, so that's the fertility formula that we drive with. And our cow as such is really on a number of legs of fertility here. And lots of people use this type of illusion, the 3 legs of the stool and so on. So I'm cheating a little bit. I have 5 in here. Genetics that Margaret has covered extraordinarily well. Good transitions. Cows getting out of the calving area well. Are you feeding them to requirements? Are you managing any disease that may be causing us some bumps? And what work are you doing to manage the mating season so that you get the best response? So, and I would give all these things almost equal weighting. I'm not going to say one is bigger or better than another. I probably have one bugbear, is that I hear a lot when I'm faced with fertility problems, oh, it must be minerals. I'd probably say less than 5% of fertility problems I've come across could I genuinely say has been a mineral deficiency or an excess. So these legs for me that we're in control of are much more important. Okay, right. So I'm not going to go. You guys understand EBI extraordinarily well. I just want to use from a vet's point of view. If I'm going to look at a fertility problem in a herd or things are not going right, for completeness, I will always look at the fertility report. I will look at your EBI report. And I must admit, the first place I go and have a look at that milk kilos PTA. Why? That milk kilos PTA is going to have an influence on how much I need to feed that cow, her ability to hold body condition, what she genetically set up for. I'm going to look at that milk fertility, and I'm going to call it balance here. I look at both. If these are really skewed, you can get cows that do, very high fertility, very low milk subindex. You get these cows that are very fat in the autumn. They don't, they don't yield for you. I'm generalizing a little bit, and Margaret can give out to me afterwards. Again, if I get this real bad balance in terms of really low fertility, high milk subindex, what am I doing in terms of energy balance of cows? Are they set up correctly, particularly those milk PTAs are poor? And I look at the maintenance. Is your cow fit for purpose? Have you got a big cow walking a long distance? Have you got a little cow that you're trying too much to get out of her and you may be giving her a pinch? So I will look at that maintenance subindex and I will look at where that is projecting the live weight of the cow. And I really love this. This is a super part, I think, of EBI from a vet or a health point of view, that if I'm looking at that maintenance subindex, I know what I have. And that'll give me a very good pointer of how I should be feeding the cow, because that body weight is translating into, yes, maintenance. How much do I need to feed that cow to maintain her? And if I'm going to walk her 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers up and down a hill, how much more maintenance do I need to add in there to keep her going? Okay, so let's keep genetics in mind. If you set up your herd badly, you're going to fail, particularly if you haven't chosen the genetics for your system well. So good people are doing well in genetics. They use the milk recording report because the bull is half of it. Pick the right cows. And again, we've seen this issue where people complain and whinge, oh, the bulls don't perform and I haven't got the heifers and I haven't got this and I haven't got milk, etc., etc. And when we really look at it, they're just blanket using dairy AI in the first 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it happens to be. And they're actually serving quite a lot of poor cows that they're getting heifers off. Or we dig in and we find that 50% of the heifers are coming out of stock bulls. So really, really look at what are you doing in terms of what cows are you picking to serve. Balance EBI for me. Doing AI in maiden heifers, I think, is your best genetic mirrored animals, and even better if you genotype and you know what you have. Breed your own replacements, yep. Genomically testing, absolutely love it. And please note, if you're going to use sweeper dairy bulls, will you genomically test them? Make sure you're not using rubbish. And Margaret, said the stock bull is a problem. He is a problem. So if you're going to do something, or you're addicted to them, or you need them for bull power for various reasons, have a look at them. And again, have good data accuracy in there. Okay, onto the nutrition bit. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here in good transition. So tie the two of them in. So we want our cows to come back cycling. That's the gist really in getting the cows transition through calving well. So 3 weeks before, 3 weeks after calving is called a transition period. It's just a high risk nightmare for cows. Bovine animals have 3 risk periods in their lives where they change as such. It's when they're born, they fall out of mum, when they're weaned, and when they calve again. They're their 3 great transitions. And that's where the 3 times you'll have vets interacting with herds. Okay, so we got to manage transition well. If you don't get this right, you are going to delay cycling in these cows. And really the main problem, it's written in here as NEPB, right? Negative energy and protein balance. I won't overemphasize protein, but there's an indication we can have a problem with certain cows with it or certain systems. So low body score, negative energy, protein balance. Any of these issues around hard calvings, which again, genetic choice of bulls, we see it all the time with stock bulls, getting retained afterbirths, womb infections, low energy ketosis problems as a result of fat cows and thin cows, and definitely milk fever, which seems to be very much on the increase in Ireland in terms of usage of calcium, all cause problems with getting these cows cycling again. And just remember, the dry cow is really the most important nutritional phase here. So that red line is the energy balance of a cow calving. Okay, the blue line is her energy requirement, as in this is the milk I'm producing, let's take it that way. And the green line is the energy uptake. So how much am I eating? So I'm going to have dips here. So I cannot match my requirement with my energy uptake. Every cow in the world, all over the world, once she calves in, she can't do it. It's really how deep and how long is that period. So from 0 weeks from the point of calving out to 8 weeks or so. If that dip is too big or it stretches out too long, I'm going to have problems. Regardless of what type of cows you have, it's going to cause a problem. And that the top arrow where I'm pointing to the crossover point, where your energy uptake matches your requirement, that's when your cow is going to go on calf. She's getting to positive energy balance. And if she's a 60-litre Holstein, she'll do it. I say reservedly, depending on the system, or if she's a 20-litre crossbred running around. When she hits positive energy balance, she's going to go. The difference is that lower yielding, smaller cow is going to do it sooner than my 60-litre lady. Okay, so the dry cow system will really determine how big that dip is, particularly if you overfeed those cows. Oh, so to prevent this, we don't want fat ladies. We want really good feed intakes, and I would certainly say big problem there is feed space on farms. So good transition management is feed space and good quality feed. If I've got a lot of twins in there, do we need to mind them? Some people are using things like propylene glycol, not in your systems. I don't expect that. And people have options in Keckstone and bolus and so on. The top two are really the most important. Top three, most important to me: feed space and intakes. If you've prolonged poor energy balance after calving, and if you get body condition loss as a result, you're going to drop your fertility. And where we see it again is groups of cows within herds who have poor first service conception rates. Poor first service conception rates. Okay, so embryo death, I hear this talked about all the time. People jumping in with scanners and saying, oh no, you've lost a pile of embryos. We need to be a bit clear here on what this actually is. Okay, so early embryo death, right? EED is actually normal. You generally don't see it. So from up to 2 weeks after AI, these cows will return cycling. They'll come back. Remember, when cows, when the vast majority of cows are AI'd, over 90% of those cows actually conceive at a level, but they lose. A lot of those embryos are lost very, very early. You'll see nothing on scan with these guys, nothing. But if it's excessive, in other words, if that conception rate is poor, really poor, again, negative energy balance is implicated here. So cows returning are excessive return of cows. Late embryo mortality is what scanners really talk about. It's after that 2-week period up to 6 weeks after AI. You don't see them returning to heat, and they come then at a funny time. They're out 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 7 weeks, 9 weeks. You're starting to see these cows come back to you. So the length of cycle is increased. You may pick them on scan if the embryo dies. Generally after day 30, you probably see them. May return to heat about 40 days roughly after service. And again, its embryo quality is poor. And the biggest implication, again, is negative energy balance. And in fairness to Michael Diskin and Chagas, well researched that dips in energy supply can have a big impact here in these cows. So really, we're getting down to, are we feeding our cows enough here? Lower production cows, you know, that sub 25, sub 22 litres, they'll hit peak milk at about a month after calving. Generally, a lot of higher production cows, a lot of our black and whites now I would regard as higher production. And even though they're high solids, high milk solids production cows, and they'll start hitting peak, they're 7 weeks, 8 weeks out. And generally by week 6, we should get to about 95% of our dry matter intake requirement. And our black and whites up to that 18, 19 kilos of dry matter intake. And again, I see George Ramsbottom and a few others in Chagas really supporting that early intake that needs to be higher. Grazing cows will consume less. Great. If you shove them inside to feed them a TMR, they'll do better. It's easier for them to eat. We're not going to do that. But definitely our goal for fresh cows and grazing situations, we definitely want them eating in excess of 13 kilos of dry matter in that first week to 10 days. And that's a that can be a real struggle on some farms, and cows have a bump for a couple of weeks, and we may get poor egg quality, which will impact that conception rate. Okay, so this is just an example, right? Very simple Excel program here. So I always look at the maintenance subindex of the cow in the top part here. I'm going to try and get a pointer out of here somewhere. Maintenance index is 15. So that live weight is going to be 566. Let's call it a genetic live weight. So robust black and white cow. She's grazing. So she's going to need about 6.5 UFL a day just to maintain her, just to keep her grazing and doing everything right, her normal function. Throw in 30 kilos of milk, reasonable fat, good protein. Let's say she's doing over 2 kilos of milk solids, 2.3. So she is going to end up in a situation she's going to need almost 20 UFL to stop her losing weight, just to match the energy output. She's going to need about 5.8 UFL per kilo milk solids. So I have a very rough rule of thumb. 6.5 kilos of high quality dry matter to maintain your cow. 6.5 kilos of high quality dry matter for every kilo of milk solids produced. So in this particular case, this particular type of cow, on average, you need around 21.5 kilos of high quality dry matter to stay neutral. Okay. So all I want to give you some simple back of the fag packet stuff, because the tendency is, and it's not about feeding more concentrate. It's about, can you feed enough grass? Can you feed, and do you need to top up with concentrate? Is that a supplement? And sometimes we see herds that are excessively pinched to hit the residual. A percentage of cows won't get there, depending on the behavior of the herd. And that again may bump that first service conception rate, which will drop your 6-week calving rate. Okay, minerals, I know I mentioned it before and I said it wasn't huge, but again, we'll have individual farms. And just note, I do see increasingly issues with our phosphorus on farms. You know, copper is probably a requirement in the vast majority of places, and particularly on farms that have had issues with molybdenum. We need a balanced copper going in there for it. And I would say in certain areas of the country, we still have selenium issues. So on lower supplementation herds that are at risk of deficiency of grass, we may have problems. So feeding 2-3 kilo feed rates may not be enough to manage particularly some of the big minerals such as phosphorus in these herds, and they may need extra supplementation. So some strategic bloods for phosphorus, probably sensible in the early breeding season, not so gone on some of the other stuff. Copper probably good in a blood test also, but phosphorus, pull out 12 cows, the magic rule of 12, bleed them and see, just check phos levels, particularly if you've had any history of them eating soil or stones or any bizarre appetites. So people are doing well in nutrition. We'll have a look at the heifers a little later. 95% of the maidens are at target weight, and I would say above target weight, not at, because people go with the average. Averages will kill you. Calving cows in at 325 max, right? But 3 average for my black and whites. And watch the body weights, particularly on my crossbreds. Fat Jersey crossbreds can run into major milk fever issues, and I'll be a bit stingy with them. I'll really cut down their energy intakes. At mating, 275 increasing, I'd suggest even 3. So I'm probably a bit more extreme. I want a better body condition, rising plane when we're hitting mating, and I want to manage that body condition at the calving point. Avoid all the disease issues. We can go into all of that if we have to. Manage the BCS loss, and that's where once a day feed fits in. And watch the dips. Like at the moment, look, you're all suffering from it. The weather is terrible. We're getting a lot of poor quality feed into animals, particularly silage is being fed at the moment. We're probably not compensating them well enough. So watch the energy value of what you're feeding. Okay. Minerals, trace elements. Yep, always investigate it. Probably low on my list, but I will investigate. Okay, disease. Just a couple of warnings here about what's going on at the moment. We do a bull tank testing, about 2,800 herds. We test 4 times every year. We've about 1,000 of those herd owners are on our gold herd health program, which they get to meet a vet at the end of the year. So we go through your fertility reports, genetic report, disease report, milk recording for SCC, and so on in a one-to-one sit down. And we have more and more people coming onto that all the time. And we learn a lot from it because we learn from your experience. So bull tank milk tests are a bit like shooting a deer with a shotgun. You'll hit him, but you won't kill him. So it's a good indication of what's going on. And certainly it gives a good pointer, particularly on parasites, liver fluke, etc. You can plan your vaccine program off it. A little bit of early warning too on testing for mycoplasma and so on. So you know all the standard stuff. The top 4 in red, vaccinate please. I just really, herds, Ireland is a big open field. I will be vaccinating for BVD, IBR, leptos, salmonella. Only stop vaccinating for BVD if you can guarantee me your animals will not come in contact with other bovines. Be very careful. And just to highlight that point, hopefully it'll pop up. Just note that end of last week, or was it March? Sorry, end of March 31st, there was 278 positive PI calves picked up, which is an increase from last year. Okay. There's 89 positive herds. So we're getting clusters of BVD in areas. And just have a look there on that Kerry-Limerick border. There was a cluster of PIs there this year, and those black hexagons, there was more than 12 PIs to 250 animals in those areas. BVD has not gone away. Just be careful, please, particularly with maidens going out to out farms, that you're definitely guaranteed they're biosecure. And I'd certainly, if there's any doubt, vaccinate the maidens pre-breeding in the first year, so you don't either generate PIs or get a nasty bump in fertility in your maiden heifers. Okay, onto the mating management side of it. Look, the main things that really influence the seasonal herd is your current calving spread. If you're a late calver and a drag calver with a low 6-week rate, it's hard to get you back. And often actually to solve it, you need to cull a hell of a lot of cows. That length of time after calving is a direct result of that. You cannot expect cows to breed successfully if they're calved a short time. We get a lot more success when they're calved more than 60 days. And that certainly applies to sexed. We'll try not to put sex semen into cows that are calved, certainly less than 50 days and preferably over 60. And unfortunately, from a research perspective, the biggest impact that we see on conception rates in seasonal herds is the heat detection quality. And hence, that's why stock bulls do solve issues for some farms. So efficiency and accuracy, and there's a difference. We can be hyper efficient. I see a lot of cows, I put them in, put in 10 cows, but 8 of them are on, 2 of them are not. But I'm very efficient at picking up heats. Some of them can be very accurate. There's 10 cows, I put in 10 cows and all 10 cows are exactly on, but there's 2 or 3 maybes that I've left behind me. You need to be efficient and accurate, and some systems bring that. Every system, tail paint, pretty much every system is roughly around 80–85% efficient. But that's where we are. The most efficient is actually a person seeing the cows 5 times a day for 20 minutes at a time, but nobody has that time. So accept that. And the vasectomized bull is probably hitting 95%, right? So efficiency and accuracy, we need to look at that. Okay, breeding magic day for me is the 1st of April. Why do I say that? That month out from when breeding happens. Obviously, if you're starting on the 20th of April, let's go back a week. But let's take it a month out from when mating start date. Assuming our transition is right, and I know I've showed a slide here on Metri check, and some people find it very, very useful. They examine every cow using the Metri check device just to give it a vaginal score as such. And the score is the discharge, and we pick up infected cows that can be treated and brought into the system sooner. Yeah, and that's a level of intervention. I think if our transition is working well, we're on good nutrition. I don't know how much more we're going to gain out of this. In exceptionally large herds where there's groups of animals that I am worried about, or problem herds, problem cows within the herd, I'd certainly examine them. No question. Full herd examination. I'd leave it up to yourself and your vet to see if there's true value in that for you. So 3 weeks to a month before mating start date, the key thing that I want to know is who's not bulling. Who is not bulling beforehand? So are we going to look for these? If my submission rates year on year are over 90%, if my empty rates after 12 weeks of breeding are 8% and less, I'm probably not as fussed about going hunting for these cows because they'll fall out of the system anyway. If I want to maintain that 6-week calving rate and I'm not hitting my submission rate figures or my conception rate figures, I will hunt for these cows before mating start date. So heat detect them, find out the cows that are not bulling, bring them in a week before mating start date, get them examined, and probably put them on a standard sink across the board, sink them in so that they all get a service in that first 2 weeks of the breeding season. That's probably where I am with those cows. Get your body condition score in your cows, heifer weights right. Get all your vaccines done. Start your heat detection if you're looking for those non-bullers. Sort out any vasectomized bulls if you're going to be using them. Make sure you have your surgery done, your results back. That's definitely they've taken out the vas deferens. That they're happy that you're feeding them, you're in control of them, the collars fit on them. If you're going to use stock bulls, make sure they have a bull soundness exam done. Problem cows that had issues around calving, over to your Metri check. Are we going to make sure that the milk fever, retained cleaning cows that hard calvings, etc., Are they okay? And also, are you going to bother with some of them? Some of those cows may have had, you know, DAs and stuff like that, and you're saying, look, am I going to put these cows through the whole business here? Or am I really going to take a poorer cow through the system? Pre-breeding exams have a question mark on it. Look, some of you I'm sure are doing it. There's guys with scanners out there doing all this kind of work. As a vet, I shied away from it. I was struggling examining 80% of the cows in the herd that were normal. What was I going to do with them? So down to your heat detection and your results. If you're a herd that's struggling with fertility, yeah, I've no problem. If you're doing well year on year, you know, and you're doing well in nutrition, I'm probably less inclined to go here. A very simple rule for me: a third of your eligible cows, so an eligible cow on calf more than 35 days, submitted each week from your mating start date. So roughly 5% of your eligible cows should be coming in every day. But and if they're not coming in, you need to ask yourself, why? Am I picking them up, or are they not cycling? And generally, we find they're not getting picked up. Okay. So that's important, because that's measuring you as this in real time. Because the problem with seasonal herds a lot of the time is we don't realize we've had a bad season until we're either 2/3 of the way through it, or someone scans in August. So you need something to follow, either on a daily basis or a weekly basis, say I'm on track. And submission rate will really, really help you here. I've written down here a continuous sync of non-bullers. If I found non-bullers prior to the mating or the mating start date, and I've synced them in, and I've got them served, at the end of the first 3 weeks, I'll find my next tranche of non-bullers and look at syncing those in. And maybe at the end of the 6 weeks, I'll do another bunch if I require that level of intervention. But that's useful use of sync in AI right into that first 6 weeks, 9 weeks. Okay, late calvers. Anything after what? It's up to yourselves what you decide is late calver, but I suppose after Paddy's Day, I'm getting a bit doubtful about some of these cows. Certainly after the 1st of April, you got to keep feeding them. Their feed intakes are not going up, and they're often milking quite a lot. They're generally older cows, so they need a higher feed rate, or you once a day them. And even cows on high yields, once a day them from the start, if they're late calvers, they'll come bulling very quickly back into the system. I will check them out. I'll do metric check these guys, because I might want to get them early, and from that point of view, I'll get a metric cure into them. If they're 35 days calved or even 30 days calved, nice and clean, and they're fitting in with a sync program with other cows, I'll put them in. I'll always AI them to short gestation beef bull, and I will scan at 30 days, or I'll check them out. If they're not pregnant and they're not coming back in heat, I want to check these and make sure that I get another shot at them before I lose them out the other end of the season. The other option is sell them. I have no problem with that either. Okay. Just on the maidens, very useful. Again, look at the maintenance sub-index in the maidens in your EBI report, and that'll give you an idea of what their adult mature weight should be, but it'll give you the target weight at start at breeding, right? This is, again, not an average. I want 95% of them on it or above it. So I want them above target weight, but not fat. And the fat heifer can be a problem, and we do see that on some farms. But a fit heifer that's above target weight and has been cycling, well, I'd probably nail her first time. And look, and some of those are significant, like that 15 maintenance index where a lot of black and whites are at. Those heifers do need to be, that group needs to be above 340. And where they've probably failed to grow is during that puberty period, 6 to 9 months not maybe growing as well in the autumn of the previous year. So look, divide them up if they're not right, weigh them if you can, get their vaccinations done, keep that BVD on board if you're on an out farm. I do think you should use your genomic testing on this group. And again, select your suitable sires for these guys. So where are they? Are you going to sync them in? What's your heat detection aids? And we'll go through a bit of that on the farm days, where we'll talk about heat detection in heifers using scratch cards versus tailpint, etc. And again, are the stock bulls working? Tendency to throw young stock bulls out with fairly large groups of heifers, and often bull power is not enough here. Also, if you haven't got a soundness exam done here and you're not monitoring these guys, you'll end up with a low 6-week calving rate because you've missed the first 3 weeks. So the stock bull has a massive impact if he's been used on heifers, and particularly if he's subfertile. Just a note on the bulls, bull power is something that gets really overlooked at the end of the season. And again, coming from the AI side of it, we'd really encourage you to keep going with AI when bulls are introduced for a week, 10 days at least, until they get used to it. And some of your bigger herds, that's a real issue, because a number of bulls go into a bigger herd and they start to form harems, or they're really getting beaten up by the cows for a period of time. A lot of these young bulls are soft, they're just not up to it, and they take time to settle in. So 1 young bull to 10 empty females, but I would really question, if we use that figure and the herd size is over maybe 250 cows, you're going to have trouble because they won't get around the herd. They won't move about. You'll need more bulls than that. And you'll need to be able to, you will need to be able to replace them out, to replace each other, and look at feeding them. A lot of these bulls in larger herds like that, hunting cows, they won't graze. Even though Herefords will sit down on their ass and they generally look lazy, but you try to keep them moving, keep them going. Okay, if you keep AI going, you're going to reduce your bull power by half. I think a lot of these bulls are a little bit too expensive for what you're getting out of them as well genetically. Watch your calving difficulty. We do see some stock bulls throwing us problems, coming back to us on calving difficulty issues. Okay, get them, treat them properly, etc. Get a soundness cert. With a soundness cert that will look at what we call the morphology of the semen. There's some certs floating around which they don't do that. They just look at the volume and they look at the movement, but they don't look at the morphology. In other words, they don't look at the sperm bodies as such to see if they're functional. And we will have stock bulls turn up. They've good movement, they've good volumes of semen, but their sperm morphology is very poor and they're quite subfertile. So look, there's vets doing soundness exams and they're giving you an actual soundness certificate, okay? So I think that's important. If a bull goes lame, he's done. They're generally a disaster because they won't pick up the second cow in the day. And that's why you just need multiple bulls, because you know yourself, you buy a couple of bulls, out they go, one of them busts a rod, the other guy goes lame, and then you have nothing. Right, just keep an eye. I won't go through all the dairy beef. But from a dairy farmer point of view, this is the bit you're looking at, and I know you're looking at calving difficulty number 1, and you're right, gestation length number 2, you're right. But you got to start looking at this carcass weight in there and make sure that these bulls that you're selecting are actually delivering a positive carcass weight with a balanced calving difficulty. So you'll see in our catalogue there that we will actually match the bull to the type of cows you should be putting them with in terms of AI. Otherwise, the place is going to be awash with poor quality Black Angus next year, which will have poor value. Okay. So look, best performers, they have a plan, and you make that decision about pre-breeding and picking up those non-bullers. You treat those problem cows that had trouble around calving, so good records. You cannot overstress the heat detection, and again, I'm probably preaching to the converted. We see so many problems with heat detection, so many problems with inaccurate, in particular, heat detection. And while I want you to throw in as many cows as you can, in terms of if you suspect her bulling, yes, put her in. You got to get semen into them. But we do see major issues where we actually don't get enough cows picked up on some farms. Vasectomized bulls can be a real help, but you got to look at the health and safety aspect. They're full bulls on farms. You might want them around. And again, please remember that figure, a third submitted by week 1. If that's not happening, there's something going on. 3 weeks into the season, action. Pick up those non-bullers again. Early preg check. Yeah. The one thing I worry about is if it's done early and everyone gets off on the embryo death and there's a big panic and so on, just be a little careful. Do it with a measured view of what you're trying to achieve by an early preg check in June. A lot of it's just checking, okay, are we approximately right? And there might be a couple of cows we pick up that have lost an embryo, but that's not my main reason to do it. You really got to ramp up your heat detection after 3 weeks because your activity in the herd is dropping. And again, if you're going to use bulls at any level, make sure that you have enough bull power and they're able to do the job. A couple of last points just on sex semen. I'm not going to get into it in massive detail. There's a very good uptake on it. We're very positive after last year. 1 or 2 herds had glitches, and I think some mistakes were made, like they used one sex bull over 30, 40 cows. Again, some of the synchronization programs not maybe followed through correctly. One sync program we came across with heifers, probably 30, 40% of the heifers were not cycling, and they were synced and struggled. But I would say in general, we've very little issues with sex semen, and very good handling by DIY as well, people using sex semen themselves. So confidence, I think, has grown. Bulls have sold out a lot of the top end. Top end is wrong. There's a lot of good bulls selected for sexed. But I think to get the bull you want, you're getting limited. So if you are interested in sexed or trying out a little bit of it, have a look now, because getting bulls that you really want to put in there are getting a bit fewer and far between. There's also some sexed beef out there for those who are interested. There's some sexed male, and there's also some sexed female beef for breeders. So have a look at that. If you're going to do a sync program, will you please, please, please have a chat with the AI tech? A lot of them are booked already, and the syncs are coming in about the 6 days before MSD. So a lot of those AI techs are booked up as is on sync programs with sexed for heifers. But look, chat with them and see what they can fit in, and make sure your vet is fitting in with the program to fit with the AI technician's arrival. If we need to get into more detail on it, we can always ask a few questions. Just the last point, we have Farm Ops in Munster Bovine. It is an app. It's more than just recording, registration, and so on. There's a nifty bit in it called breeding metrics. And what it does is when you've heats and serves recorded, so anything that's recorded in a handheld is automatically recorded, goes up to ICBF, comes down to us every morning, and we issue you with a breeding metric every morning at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. And what it's telling you is what should be coming on, what cows have not come bulling or calved more than 35 days. Cows that were served before, at heat before, are they due again? What's the list? We know whether your serves are valid or not. In other words, are they short cycling, long cycling, which means we can tell what your accuracy is like. So if you're below or above target on your serves, are you actually serving enough animals? And again, as your breeding winds down and your AI winds down, we'll tell you how many stock bulls you actually need to mop up the rest of the herd with a bit of room to maneuver in there. So that's a dynamic piece within Farm Ops. If you're interested, we can get you to download, and you can follow through your breeding season. Okay, so I'm going to finish with this. So nearly always, as a vet going in here, there's a bottleneck in one or more of the 5 legs. And once I identify the bottleneck, we can release it. If you have really good breeding records, I can do it. And if I have the milk recording, I generally can do it. If you have no breeding records, no heats recorded, and no SIRS recorded, no pregs recorded, lads, buy different minerals. Yeah, I can't fix anything. I just won't know. There's not enough data. So data is very powerful here. And we use some bespoke fertility reports when we're looking at fertility systems. Get the right genetics. Are you fit for purpose for your system? Fix your dates of action now. What are you going to do in the first of on mating start day? What are you going to do 3 weeks out? Most issues are due to lack of activity. Either the cows aren't active, the bull isn't active, or the farmer isn't active. And we can analyze it out from the reports. Okay, so we generally can find the problem from data. My golden one is dry matter intake is king pre and post calving, and nutrition Feb, March, April for dairy cows pre-breeding is key for me to get quality eggs and embryos coming out of these cows. So don't underestimate what your cows need. And I want these systems to be low intervention. So I'm not going to bait you into doing a lot of scanning or intervention. It's necessary on some farms. But if you've done a lot of the other stuff on the list right, we should be able to cruise through. Mary, there you go.
Hey, thank you, Martin. That was fantastic. The both of you, they fit together perfectly. And it's the best thing about being the chair. I get to ask questions. But look, we will take the opportunity, if you're brave, we can make this interactive. If you'd like to raise a hand, anyone can come in with a question. Also, there's the chat function there if you'd like to come in as well. I will get it started though. I was at group the other day, and there was a farmer there talking about his use of sex semen, and he was very happy with it. And not to take away from that, but it was just funny how the conversation then rolled on to the fact that he'd had quite a few lost embryos and there'd been a bit of a lull, and it was funny, and so it just popped up and said, are you sure? Are you sure your sex semen had been successful? And I suppose the key point to that was, you know, to assess your reality. What are the key reports that you can go to, say in ICBF? And Martin, that comment as well. It's funny how anecdotally farmers come up about something that's either working well or something's either happening with fertility, but it could actually be something else. So again, being quite sort of measured in terms of how do we assess whether it is actually what they think the problem is. I'll go to you, Margaret, first. Where would you start on the reports?
I mean, yeah, so obviously, you know, the number of serves would be there in all your fertility reports, and deciphering which serve got there is probably your main question there. Like it in terms of the expected calving date and what would be suggested to you as the sire of the calf would be an indication. But look, it is an area that I know that the AI companies are like, they're very, very interested in this, because they do want to know exactly, can we confirm each serve that you do in your breeding season to the subsequent calving. So look, it is a body of research that's being done at the moment, and one that, you know, again with sex semen, it's after exploding, really, to be honest. It's just in terms of the level of uptake in it is huge this year, again due to the amount of availability of sex bulls this year, which is fantastic for the industry. But again, as you say, Mary, we do have to watch. It is a new technology, and are the serves, you know, being successful or not? So look, just to put your mind at rest, definitely the AI companies are very, very, they are watching this. So it's a conception rate analysis basically on those exact serves.
But I suppose the key point is, for those people who think they know what's happening, it's quite important to have had a look at their own fertility report to actually see, you know, what the reality of that was before making a sweeping statement as it has it been good or has it not. Do you know, the information's there.
But so if it was for last season, they should have it now, though, because the cows have calves, so the validation of the serves would have come true in what they recorded as their sire, provided. Now, obviously, genotyped herds would be the most reliable herds, because you can't lie about the sire there. The genotype will tell you who the sire is. So if the genotypes are. Yeah,
absolutely. Martin, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think Margaret is covering that sort of larger, what's that national impact of bulls, and the work that ICBF do to help us understand that and conceptualize is enormously important. At the farm level, really, when we're looking at this stuff, to avoid the sweeping statements, the more information that's recorded up in ICBF, either through apps or whatever system you do, if you get that service information up there and we can relate that to pregnancy information, then at that point of view, we can analyze. And again, it's back to the formula. Is it submission rate problem? Is it a conception rate problem? Because we get things that are blamed in the wrong constantly. Because I will start looking at things like heat interval. I look at non-return rate. What's the original calving spread? What is that interval from, you know, a cow calving to being put in calf? And it's amazing how your mind starts getting focused on, is the lack of activity the bull, the cow, or is it the farmer? And you got to sometimes take it on the chin. The farm can be the problem, but in other instances, the bull is the problem. In other instances, the cows are issues. Fertility is an enormous thing to decipher and untangle. So the more information you put into a system, the better we can investigate.
We've got a couple of questions there as well on the chat function. So is there a value in doing a pre-breeding scan on the entire herd? I'll go to you, Martin, I'd say, on that one.
Yeah, okay. So I'm reserved. I'm reserved about it because, and you can blame me for being lazy, Mary, and I say this constantly at discussion groups. If you've got that genetics nailed on, nutrition nailed on, and your calving has been nailed on, I'm kind of going, okay, focus on your problem cows and non-bullers, put your effort in there. If you've got a fertility problem in the herd, I think there may be value. But if you haven't, I would put a question mark on it and I'd fight the case, you know.
Okay, another question there is, what's the conception rate on what conception rate on mature cows would be considered successful for sex semen?
Do you want to take it, Margaret? I think you have high expertise here.
Yeah, like, I mean, look, again, actually what we're seeing is because people are biasly picking their cows, which is a good thing. So you're picking the cows that are calved the longest, probably have the best genetics. And even if they are mature cows, so I know there is some advice out there to say don't bother with sex semen if they're over fourth lactation, but some people might have a really extremely good cow that's, she's never given them a problem. I'm going to use I'd love a replacement dog for her. We are seeing the conception rates are actually quite high, but from, we'll say, field or from study trials such as what Stephen Butler did in Moore Park, you're still talking, about 85% conception rate of the conventional. So if the conventional is at around 55, 60, it's 85% of that. But what we are seeing is there is a bit of a biasness. So it's a hard one to tell. I really think there needs to be another controlled trial like that to make sure that we can give an indication to the industry, has sex semen come on in its conception rates, and does it have a difference between mature cows and young cows? I'd expect there would be a difference.
Okay, fair enough. Margaret, you just pointed out that it was skirted over, but there's probably some merit if you have a low EBI herd to actually not breed your replacements, to actually buy your replacements. The question to the both of you, there's good quality stock out there. They're not cheap to rear. Economically, is it the best decision? Any sort of thoughts on that, both of you?
Just briefly, there's a trade-off. Obviously, you have your biosecurity, which I'm sure Martin would probably bring up there. But definitely, if you're trying to improve your genetic merit and you're at a very low point, again, it's down to personal preference, but definitely I think it's a good option. Like, there is fantastic stock out there. There is more replacements. People aren't expanding as much as they were. And now we have sex semen, usage has gone up. So there's going to be more replacements out there. So, I mean, if you are in that category, it is definitely an option. But again, the biosecurity measures is a huge trade-off there. You have to be very careful that the health of those heifers that you're buying in and bringing in is up to scratch and they're vaccinated, like what Martin pointed out earlier.
Yeah, but it would take up to about 7 years to actually have a significant impact on your genetic worth if you were to do it yourself from a very
and everyone else has improved as well in the meantime. So
it's an absolute fast track if you're at a very low base. Any thoughts, Martin, with that?
Yeah, I must admit, like there's a couple of elements to it, but when you look at those low EBI herds, and I know there's individual cows in those herds that perform very well, and they could be high EBI, they could be, say, plus one. I know 150 is a bit of a figure that's thrown out, Margaret, that if a cow is, if a cow is under that, we shouldn't really be breeding her. I think some herds need a nuclear option. And actually, there's a couple of reasons behind it, because I think it's not only the genetic merit and the response, the production response, but it's also getting cows that fit the system and fit the farm. Because it's so many times in veterinary, we're actually dealing with problems on farm, is the cows are not appropriate for the system. They're just not appropriate for the ground conditions, grass, etc., etc. And people need to flip out, and you need to go nuclear. The biosecurity thing. Look, the big issue really for me there is, unfortunately, and as I'm sure many on the call have experienced, is TB. I think TB is probably the thing that is everything else I can probably cope with, and we don't know how much iones we have out there. So again, absolute caveat and warning on that. I will not be flippant about biosecurity. But if I'm losing a lot of my sustainability through not having the right cows on my farm, I would go nuclear. Yeah, clean them out.
Yeah. Okay. If is there any more questions from the people on today? I haven't seen any raised hands, so I'm looking on the chat function at the moment. If you have any more questions, please come in. But look, Mela Briscoe, there we go. Mela, do you want to go for it? Put your mic on and go for it.
Hi, great presentation, folks. Thanks very much. Margaret, I'm just wondering about the new profile with the weights that's matching up to the maintenance figure. It's mind-boggling. All the amount of information that's there is massive. And I'm just wondering, to be really effective, how many times a year would you recommend them to be weighed, and up to the point of the day before you start your breeding program, or when is the nearest date? We weighed ours the 27th of March, and you know, the weather's been so bad, they've been in and out and up and down. It's our first year to do the fixed HMI for the heifers. We're going to use the sext on some of the heifers. And, you know, with the weather being so bad and everything, I'm very nervous about which ones to pick and which ones not as regards their weights. But it's a fabulous look. There's a huge amount of information there, and well done on it.
No, that's great feedback on that. And look, I mean, obviously we would say the more information we get, the better in terms of having those figures right. But obviously weighing is a massive job, massive labor. So like again, you know, like I mean, it probably depends on, like, I mean, you're after weighing them there on the 27th of March. Like, what can you do now? Like, I mean, the time is you're going to be breeding what ones you can now. Like, there's not much more you can do. So, I mean, you know, I suppose I don't know what the complete guidelines would be, but you'd be talking maybe twice a year, at minimum. But yeah, I can definitely see. It's great to hear that you're using it for that aspect, and maybe you select out some of those heifers that maybe just won't make it.
Martin, have you any thoughts on you know, at how late we should be, you know, when is the last weight that should be going in?
In terms of getting value out of it, Mela, in terms of what you can do with it. Yeah, I mean, I think again, every item of work we do in farm, we must be able to extract the value out of it, so we know that our blood, sweat, and tears is giving us an action, something to do. I get really concerned about heifers. My big concern, I have two concerns about them. One, I'm seeing more and more our higher percentage of heifer replacement calves not doing as well. The overall group average looks good, but you get 20-30% have got a bump in the road, pneumonia or low feed rates, right? And again, I'm not looking to push anything in particular, but that's a concern. That concern is equal again, I would late summer, autumn, getting into that poor grass quality, September, October, November, and demanding our young stock to do a little bit better. The weight at that point for me is critical, so you identify that 30%. So I want two weights there in the summertime to tell me what's going on with the bottom 30%. I want you to do something in the housing period. I want to know in January, when you're trying to work off the turkey, what's going on with those heifers again, and do we need to add in a bit of feed getting into that late January, February period? Too many people telling me they're grand on silage and they all look okay. There's 30% of them hanging back in there that are not right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mela. We'll go to our last question as well there on the chat. Can you make any comment on the prevalence of milk fever that's happening? You've indicated before that it's a little bit on the rise. Why is that, Martin?
Yeah, look, I think part of that is our farming systems. I think we've all become aware of high potash and silage causing us problems. I think we're not making dry cow milking cow silage, we're making silage. And I think our dry cows can be affected quite a bit. And it'll vary from year to year. Okay, so you're going to get them fat one year, thin the next year, high fiber, low fiber, etc. So over body weight, high potash is problems in silages that not all minerals will get you out of jail, right? That's one thing. Overcrowding, I think, has been a problem on some farms. So transition cows have not fed well, and from that point of view, susceptibility to milk fever is higher. I certainly would, on some of the crossbred herds, Jersey has brought in that milk fever tendency, the poor vitamin D receptors in their intestine, they will get more milk fever. And if you don't body weight manage those and feed space those guys correctly, you will run into trouble. And I'd really be interested in Margaret's comments on, if we have enough health data coming through, are we really being smart enough in selecting genetically away from transition disease?
A simple answer there, Martin, is no. The health data is lacking completely because, you know, in terms of the fertility, we get loads in because you all have to register your calves, milk carding. We've seen that uptake of 38% more herds milk carding, and it's been great. Health, you know, the heritability of those traits are so low. So, you know, again, that just means for us, in terms of giving you good quality evaluations and proofs, we need far more records to make those proofs more accurate. So yeah, it is a problem. People, you know, don't probably realize that their data in their notebooks or in their phone or in their head is so important, and if we could get them into the database. But again, look, genomics has done great for us in that term, in terms of what data we do have, how we're able to actually extrapolate that out even further now, because genomics can give us, those key indicators within the DNA. So look, we have expanded the health sub-index, and I mentioned there about cell count earlier. TB, I forgot to mention, is gone in there. So again, to look at that. But then for those kind of milk fever and all those, they're not in there, but they are picked up indirectly in terms of the survival of the cows, and their milk performance and all that. So look, it's definitely, it's an expanding area. So again, we don't get any data like that coming in anyway on milk fever.
Okay, thanks guys. Look, we're gonna probably have to wrap it up because we're over time as usual. But it was just such good content, so I can't thank you enough. And I think, obviously there was that little bubble diagram there that Martin have about genetics creates potential, management realizes potential, and diseases destroys potential. Even just on the issue of milk fever, again, in terms of how we actually manage those cows coming into the herd, that even just that feed spacing, I've seen it myself, a little bit of a pinch in feed space of a freshly calved cow and she's on her knees the next day. So, we need to use our eyes and see as well. We do control a huge amount on farm. So there's a lot within our own ability to actually take control of and make impact. So thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. We do have a couple more slides, lads, just to finish off.
I'll get them there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so this series is going to be supported by a series of on-farm meetings which have been kindly sponsored by Munster, but also ICBF are going to be along as well. We've got 3 dates: Friday the 14th at Denise Weeks in County Limerick. We've got Monday the 17th of April, Deirdre Hines there in County Galway, and we've got Wednesday the 19th of April, Tara Heaney. Thank you very much, ladies, for hosting these meetings. I think Munster will even be providing a goodie bag, and these are actually open to everybody, so it's not just members only. We want to invite potential new members. We were obviously aiming to grow the network that we've got presently, so please come along to that. Also, in terms of the members only meetings, the next meeting that we'll be having over Zoom is with Professor Alice Stanton, and basically she to summarize it quickly because we're short of time, but she's basically being proactive to try and get more fair representation on meat in terms of the diet, and also it's being basically badly represented in terms of the importance in our diet. So I think that's it. So you can move on from that one. Thank you very much for you guys participating from DWI, but also thanks very much to the steering committee. We're a voluntary network at the moment, and there's 13 ladies that keep this show on the road, so I have to thank those too. So lovely. Hopefully we'll see you on farm.